All right, full stack dev, assignment number number one. Let's take a look at this. So what we want to do here is we would like to use Socket.io. So what the objective is to build a full stack app, obviously with JavaScript, Node.js, MongoDB. Interface is the same, HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript, but we want to use Node, Express, and MongoDB. So we're continuing on with our application. So we want to continue on with those RESTful API calls that we already have done from the lab test. There will be some starter code. So first we want to be able to search. So this is a minimum variable product. So we already have this, or if we don't, the starter code already calls the REST API from the front end to Node.js with those endpoints so that we may search for music and bind the results to the UI. We want to still have the favorites, adding the favorites and retrieving the album cover. But what we want to add for this assignment is we want to add some networking. So we want to use Socket.io so that we can connect across that channel, TCP/IP channel, just to keep track of the fact that if we were to expand this further, you could actually see how many people were connected to it and how many people were downloading. But we just want to make a basic socket connection, track connected, disconnected users, handle a request, mimicking the fact that somebody might want to download a file, at least put the plumbing in. And then we want to log some of these events to the database. Ideally, that's what we want. So stage one is using Socket.io. There's a lot of links to documentation there. We should have done this if you've done the lab, but similar setup. So we want to first add a reference to the Socket.io on the client side. And we want to create some handlers just for the connect and disconnect so that when we load that page up, the browser will, register a socket for that user. And then we want a custom event handler. So we want a custom named event called download received that will receive the response or acknowledgement from the server when the user tries to download a song, right? Now we're not going to actually download that file. We're just mimicking the request coming across that network. Right. I mean, we can always expand on this, right? So on the client side, we have a download event handler that using that. So the download handler, when you click the button, will emit a custom event, not customer event. Sorry, that's a typo. Custom event download. So that's going to trigger emit to the backend server that we're downloading, and it's going to pass the ID to the server. There's some documentation on emitting events. On the server, same deal. We are going to install Socket.io. Now, mind you, use this version 2.2.0. If you install the latest Socket.io, you will get CORS errors. You'll get your browser. It won't work unless you do some more work to handle that. Your browser will just keep pinging the backend in 404 errors, and you're going to have not a very smooth time. So we want to install this. We're going to integrate this with our Express server. So you have to initialize a server. There's some documentation on that, right? Basically, you start your Express server as you normally would, and then you start your Socket.io using that same instance of the server, right? And then once we got that initialized, then we want to do the connect disconnect. Those are pretty templated out, and we want to, log to the console just to see that it's happening. Create a custom event for download so that when the client emits this download here, it'll be caught on the server side, and the server side will output the fact that, hey, I got the ID. I'm emitting back download receive event, which should be caught in the front end, right? So it's just kind of demonstrating some communication across that port and things are happening, right? So same deal. Let me just quickly open this here. All right, we have the same interface. if you refresh it, you can see right away sockets connected. And then I can see here socket connection accepted. So if I were to filter whatever, grab some information now, when I click this download button, it's gonna fire my existing handler, but this time it's gonna emit across that socket that's connected a request for that download. It's gonna fire that custom event for download that the server should capture on the other side. So if I click this here, it should say socket received from the server with ID 1. So what happened is when we clicked that button, it emitted down to the server and the server caught it here. So you can see that it actually caught it and said receive client message to download music video 1. And then obviously it probably emitted back the fact that it was received and that it was caught here. So on the client side, it said download received from the server with ID 1, same deal, 6, 7, 8, right? We're just kind of putting plumbing in. Of course, if this were to close, right? If we close the browser entirely, that would mean that the server would capture the disconnect right there. So the socket is done for that guy. All right, so what I want to do quickly, so I'm going to pause this and I'm going to come back with the next stage. All right, so stage 2 is we want to do something with those socket requests and requests. We want to actually we want to persist them, those events that we talked about, those click events or those request events. So we need to use Mongoose and MongoDB. So in our previous lab, we talked about MongoDB and how to install it on our local machine. And I mean, there is a cloud version of it as well, but that's not required here. It'd be great, but it's not required. So you need to install Mongoose from npm. And then once you install that, you need to make a connection to MongoDB in your Node.js server.js file, that main entry point to Node.js. So the connection string will look like this. You can use this exactly, but just keep in mind that you will have to change this app name, like right there. That's from an older example. I have something called Napster Music app now. Just know if you don't include that, it'll put it into the default, I believe it's config collection. But if you want to control where this is going, it's a good idea to name it so that when you start saving your documents, it'll go to a place that you can quickly look up. So I want to create 2 models using this Mongoose wrapper. Remember, the Mongoose is the wrapper over MongoDB. We want to create, and again, there's some documentation there. We want to create a socket event, which has the following schema. Socket is a string. You can name it socket ID, doesn't matter, but it's the socket ID. Every socket will have a unique identifier. We want to store the type, so whether it's connected or disconnected, and the time of this, the time of the event, the socket event occurred. Pretty straightforward there. So we have a download event, which is a model. These are models, right? And the following schemas to this Mongoose model is, again, it has a socket or a socket ID, which is a string, a song ID, which is the requested thing you pass down from the front end, and then the download time. So once you have these models created via Mongoose, you import these models into wherever your Socket.io event handlers are configured. Using these models, you save the information, right? So when somebody clicks download in that handler, you will have access to the socket, which has an ID. You will have a time, and you will have the music or song ID. So you create an instance of your model, and then with this wrapper, you can save it, and it'll save it as long as everything's configured right. You will start saving these things to a database. So we kind of have, so if we have, and like as you're going, you can clean it up. It's not required. Like I had a lot of console log things. I put them as debug, so I could quickly, you can see they're filtered in blue. So if I don't want to look at them, I can just look at the info. So if I search this here, you can see here, I click the download again from the server with IDs on the back end. You'll see a little different. I kind of, from my environment, it's up to you, but I actually console logged it in a different way using /n, which is new line. So you can see here's the socket ID, here's the type, the connection, and I said, I put it all together, right? Connected at this time. This was some leftover console logging that's kind of annoying, but I left it in there. So you can see that there, and then stored an event in the database. You can see a download started with this socket ID, with this song ID, and at that time. So if you have everything set up properly, we should be persisting these events to the database. So if we use, if you have Mongo Compass installed or one of those other ones, you can see. So I had Napster music apps. You'll see that the collections will automatically be created. Otherwise, it'll end up in config here, right? So just keep that in mind. If you don't default, it'll end up in config. So I have Napster music apps. So I have a couple things in there. So if I look at socket events, you'll see the database just looks like this. You'll see these documents in there. Of course, that's the ID it assigns, that underscore ID. There's our connection, the socket ID, and the time. And you'll see every time you're disconnecting or reconnecting, right? It'll store that in there. I don't close my browser out too much, so there's not many disconnects. The download events is the same thing. Again, song ID, socket, and download date. So we are just persisting something now with our application. So that is stage number. That's stage number 3. I'll show you the next stage in 1 second. All right, for stage 3 is really just tidying up our endpoints a little bit. It's worth 15%. So we have 2 endpoints that are wired up that we really care about. The other ones are there for us. We can leave them from the lab test. We really care about that filter music endpoint. Now you may have named it something else. That's fine. You don't have to use my code if you don't want to. You can use your own. Whatever it is that you use to call the search, it doesn't have to be named filter music. You could have had just whatever you configured it or named it. You could just have search music or whatnot. Same with favorite. When you make that call to grab the information for the album cover from the Node.js, we just want to wrap this with a route. So we want to use Express Router. Express Router, you can configure it in a way that it'll put the /search extension in front of any of your endpoints. But right now we only care about 2. So what that looks like is if we use the browser, we can certainly use the browser here. You can see there's a route here now, an extension called search in front of our original one. If we remove that, it's not going to handle it anymore. The previous, before this change I made, it would have handled filter music as well as favorite, but now we want to add a search route so that anything that comes in there is tagged with search. The reason why we do that is if we have lots of endpoints, we want to organize them in a certain way, right? Same deal if we go to Postman, we can hit these directly. So you can see the searches right there in front of it. If I had my old endpoint for favorite, I try to send a request for that. It won't work anymore because it's looking for it under the search route. So now if I kick this off, I get that record, that music data from the back end. Once you have these done, then you just have to go back to your UI and fix those endpoints so that now they're looking at your local host with the search extension. So once you update all that, it should all run the way it had previously run prior to that change, right? You can still search. And then when you're clicking the favorites, it's building that favorite list out with that image URL that maps to your local asset image folder, and then you got that all working. So that's a breakdown of this project. It may be easier than the lab tests. We kind of broke it in 2 pieces in a sense. So what we're looking at is stage 1, 35% for the socket IO work. The Mongo and Mongoose are persisting those events is 35%, so that's the bulk of it. Cleaning it up with a nice router is 15%, and then clean code and clarity demonstrate that you can use all these pieces together where possible. It's great if you use some ES6 middleware and all these things, right? So that's that for that extension. I will for this project, I will post this up. I will extend it, like I said, the extension. I will extend this because we're getting it a little bit later. So it's going to be due 2 weeks time, December 7th, 1 a.m. because we have an exam this week. We're not going to have time to really work at 25% of the grade. All right, that's that. And good luck on this one, guys.